Hello, this is Gary Marv, Glendale Community College. This screencast is for my SAS 156 Python 1 students. In this chapter, chapter 13, we're going to talk about creating GUI applications in Python. It turns out that there are probably a couple different ways to do this. Our book uses a framework called tkinter, but there are other frameworks available. Some of them are newer and a little bit more robust, especially when it comes to working with mobile environments. But tkinter has kind of been the old reliable framework, and it's very similar to most of the other frameworks. We'll expand upon creating GUI applications in the last couple of weeks of the class. One of the things that most of the IDEs in Python do not do is graphical GUI design. Now let me put that in perspective. If you're used to using Visual Studio in a Microsoft environment, you know that you're able to drag and drop things like text boxes or buttons or menu options to a window. And then from that, design code is going to respond to different button events, hover events, things like that. There are tools like that available for Python, but they tend to be several tools kind of bundled together. We're going to see this in the last couple of modules of our class with a tool called Qt, which is used for a bunch of languages, Python being one of them. But for right now, we're going to use Stoney, and what I've done is taken a different application than is in the book, one that I used to use in my other class. It has a little bit more to it in terms of some of the calls, but essentially it's the same basic design. So I thought I would cover this one to kind of get us started here. Let's start off by running the application so we can see what it looks like. It's a simple calculator program, right? I mean, very simple. So if I run this application, let me pull this down so you guys can see it. All it's supposed to do is take two numbers, 3 and let's say 5. If you hit the calculate button, it should add them together and give you this sum over here. It does have some exception handling in it, so if I put a letter in there by mistake and it throws a runtime error, it'll produce input error in the box without actually crashing the program. Okay, something that we have learned so far in some of the applications covered up to this date. When you are working with GUI applications, you're going to make extensive use of class objects, which is something we've covered in previous chapters. You're going to find that there'll be a central class to actually build the GUI and all the events associated to different widgets on the screen. And in this case, we've got a program, the program is called Calculator Program. And I will place this in Canvas so you guys can also look at it. But the main class is called Calculator Program. And if I go down here to the bottom of this file, eventually, okay, here's the start of the program. I'm going to instantiate tkinter. I'm going to instantiate my class object called Calculator Program. And then I'm going to put it in a loop, waiting for it to respond to mouse clicks, drag drops, etc. That's fundamentally how most of the Python frameworks work. It's how most window applications work. If you're a Visual Studio user, maybe coming from Visual Basic or C#, you're going to be probably surprised to see how much code is generated for a Windows application, because in the Microsoft environment, Visual Studio hides most of this from you. All right, so let's look at the top of the calculator program. And we'll start off with its constructor. In the constructor, it's going to instantiate frame. Now, frame is going to come from tkinter. It's going to be what actually causes the windows to be formulated. It's going to put, in this case, based on properties, a title on top. And you're going to see your first GUI type function here called pack. This is something that tkinter uses to basically center, refocus, position, I guess is probably the best word, the actual GUIs or widgets on the screen. In this case, what it's going to do is it's going to pack the window in the center of the frame, and with that calculator being at the title bar. This is probably not the best example of how pack works. You'll see some other things below here that give it a better example. The next thing it's going to do is deal with strings. Now, I don't think the book goes into this to the same extent as this application does, but strings, when you're using them with this this frame or this window in the GUI app, have to be instantiated as variables that are owned by the object, and they have to be set ahead of time, because if you plan on using anything in your program, a button click, in my case the calculate button, that's going to change something that exists in one of those widgets on the screen with a string, this answer string or something like it, a string variable, must be set up ahead of time that is owned in an instance variable of that frame object. In this case, I've got answer string. I'm going to set answer string to have the initial text of answer equals 0. And if you remember back when I started the application, that's what it showed off to the right side. This is fairly extensively commented. I'm not going through all the comments. You guys can read that on your own. And I would encourage you to run this in the debugger, try it out, kick the tires, make some changes in it so you get a better feel for how it works. The first thing it does is going to set up an entry widget. Now, what you call the actual graphical object on the GUI probably depends on the programming language. The Microsoft world calls these controls. Everybody else kind of calls them widgets. But even within the widget control terminology, there's differences. In the Microsoft world, this would probably be called a text box. And here it's called an entry. And basically what it is, it's a square box that's formed to accept input. It's going to be associated with frame, which I instantiated already. And it's going to have a width of 5 positions. I'm going to push it to the left of the display. That's that pack command again. And then I'm going to set the focus on that field because that's where I want the user to start, which would be the first area they could key a number in. I'm going to create a second entry area called number 2. It's going to also be associated with a frame. It's going to have a width of 5, and it's going to be pack left. So it's going to sit right next to the number 1 entry object. Calc button is next. Notice that I've moved from an entry object to a calc object, and it's got more parameters in the constructor. So it's again associated with frame. The text will be calculate, and the foreground color will be blue. Okay, these are properties of the object, and when sent this way, I'm sending it to the constructor so that the properties are set within the object. I could actually set these using dot notation, but I'm actually using them with a constructor. I'm going to again pack that to the left so it's sit next to the entry box. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bind to that control an action that's triggered by a single button click. The action is called add numbers. It's a method owned by this object. And if I go down here to the bottom, you can see there's my function called add numbers. It's expected to be owned by this object. It's expecting to get an event to trigger it. When the event is triggered, it's going to take the value 1 and populate it with the number 1 contents. There's my get and sets. Remember that from the classes. It's going to take value 2 and get that from the second input box. In a try block, it's going to actually do the math. And the reason the try block has the math is because if somehow I slip in there a letter by mistake, I want to throw the exception, and I've just got a wildcard exception. So basically anything that happens with those 2 input boxes in the calculation would cause this error message to appear called input error inside the text box to the far right of the screen. And again, remember I set up answer string early on. Now let me go back a little bit and you can see where the calculation is going to happen. I've got an instance variable called total. It's going to take the string value and let's see. It's going to take the first value, add it to the second value as integer, convert it to string, and store it into total. And then it's going to concatenate answer equals to total, which again will all be strings, and that's what's going to be displayed in that area called answer string, which is in the far right of my display. That's the end of the class, which controls not only the look and feel of the GUI application, but also the logic necessary to get it to work on the button click. Note that I'm importing Tinker up here, or tkinter up here. I'm grabbing all of its members. And then let's see, is there anything else I should talk about? Oh yes. And then down here, what's happened is I'm going to instantiate as root the tkinter module. I'm going to then instantiate as app program calculator, passing it root, which is the tkinter information. That actually forms my frame. And again, a lot of this stuff is going to seem hocus pocus. And a lot of it, quite frankly, is. It's just the different steps necessary to get a windowed application up and running. The last step is to take that root instance that I've instantiated from TK and put it in what's called main loop, which is a method that's owned by tkinter. And all that does is listen for something to happen with the application. One of the primary differences between developing applications for a GUI and applications for a console app, which is what we've done for the most part so far, is that with a GUI application, you really don't know what the user is going to do. They could close the app, They can put the first number in, the second number, and then hit calculate. They can hit calculate. Of course, then they're getting an error. But you really have to be prepared to handle anything the user can do, because when you create a GUI application, you give up some of the control. If this was a console application, I would ask for the information in the appropriate order, and if it was incorrect, I'd simply ask for it again. But in the GUI, it's a little bit more complicated than that. The actual code behind the button looks very much like our console app, but we have to be very conscious about what the user might give us that could cause problems with the program, either because it's the wrong data type or it's out of order from the way the calculation needs to work. We have to plan for that in our design, and maybe in some cases we have to gray a button out or gray an area out until we've reached the point in the code where we can then use it. And if you think back to either using Phony, Microsoft Word, Excel, whatever, that will be the kinds of environments you want to create with your applications. Thank you.